This is a petition that you can sign and put your email. Here's some talking points on divestment. If you want, this is the open letter from the faculty in support of it and their viewpoints.
Okay.
And this is just kind of a symbolic.
What do you think Craig stands on divestment?
Dip. Do you want any?
Did your boss at Oxford Sustainability?
Answer?
Just say the word.
Yeah, if you could.
Yeah.
Sometimes you
I'll use this as a conversation. Are we getting
change. And part of this, part of the charge is to get a sense or an understanding of campus sentiment and campus thinking about this issue as well. So tonight we're going to have some very short but to the point presentations, and we hope there'll be a lot of discussion. When I attend that too, certainly May. Now we've broken our committee down, our task on the committee, into certain parts or sections. One has to do with the basic science. What is the consensus of the science on climate change? And what we know less. And
gas emissions. So shown here are two projections, the kind of boundaries of the projections used by the IPCC for the business as usual scenario. Our emissions today are actually slightly above this scenario, if you think of this projection.
I know best. I grew up in Wisconsin. Agriculture affects all of us, obviously. In our state, it's a $60 billion impact to our economy every year in our state. And we have what's being discussed among scientists. I know best. I grew up in Wisconsin. Agriculture affects all of us, obviously. In our state, it's a $60 billion impact to our economy every year in our state. And we have what's being discussed among scientists. I wanted to read it because it's very compelling. It's not coming from me as a scientist. It's coming from someone who's being affected in their everyday life. So Matt says, here's a quick history of what climate change looks like in Iowa. We had historical flooding in 2008, the 500-year flood. Again in 2010, we had another series of 100-year floods. Then in 2011, the Missouri River wiped out thousands of acres of farmland off the map. Some of that highly productive farm ground will never be farmed again. Then we shifted gears into the catastrophic drought of 2012. So in half a decade, Iowa saw some of the worst flooding and the worst drought in over a century of keeping records. Climate scientists have told us this is what climate change will look like, and it is going to get worse and more extreme. And so we have 2013. The first record we set was the May 4th snowstorm. We had a foot of heavy, wet snow, lost power for 36 hours, and when it started snowing on the 3rd, and as I was walking out to check my cattle that night, I was trudging through 4 inches of snow and hearing frogs in the pond. I remember thinking this is really strange. I suppose there's some place in the world where there are frogs in the snow, but not in Iowa. This is one of the things climate change means, the wrong weather at the wrong time. In other words, this blizzard resulting in the most snow ever recorded in Iowa in May. Then it's set to raining, the most rain ever recorded in the month of May in Iowa this year. Then it shut off, and we're back into drought. August this year was one of the driest on record, even drier than during last year's epic drought. And I almost forgot July was one of the coldest on record in Iowa. There are places in the state that recorded low temperatures in the 30s in July, and now we're experiencing one of the hottest Septembers on record. The hottest days in 2013 in Iowa came after Labor Day, with multiple days above 100 degrees. The joke is, since February came in May along with all the rain for summer, and September came in July, and July came in September, what month is going to happen in October? But it isn't a joke when you're trying to farm. It isn't a joke when taxpayers are picking up some of the cost of the crop insurance bill. And it isn't a joke when a farmer watches his precious soils wash away overnight with 11 inches of rain, or when wells are empty and ponds dry up. Yet there are still people who deny climate change, and some of the loudest voices of denial have come from the agriculture community. There may be some farmers out there who are still denying climate change is happening, but trust me, none of them are ignoring it. They're putting in drain tile like crazy to deal with more extreme rainfall events. Contractors putting in ponds and digging deeper wells can't keep up with the demand as farmers deal with repeated and longer-lasting droughts. Farmers are buying more crop insurance to deal with the extreme weather and more frequent crop losses. Livestock producers are downsizing or completely liquidating because they can't find affordable feed. Climate change is real, it's happening, it's going to get worse, and it's already causing great harm to farms like mine. Thanks for listening. I'm sorry.
Anyway, so as I had said, my name is Jamie Shower. I should just, as a way of introduction, say that my sort of focus and research and the things that I'm involved with is very much about air pollution. And so one of the things that probably isn't as clear to everybody, but air pollutants are incredibly important for climate change as well, beyond CO2, and they're also very important for human health. And so my sort of focus and interest is looking at the non-CO2 pollutants and what they do for climate change and what they do for human health. And I've had a chance to think a lot about sort of this sort of global perspective. I should say that I'm a lead author on the IPCC, the deaths that we'll have due to climate change. If you look at the current number of deaths that we have due to indoor and outdoor pollution, they're about 10 times higher due to air pollution than we predict for climate change. And so one of the key messages is that as we look forward,
I was asked to talk about energy use, so what I thought would be good is to not talk about technology so much as to talk about if we were to have changes in energy use policy, can it affect climate issues? And I guess I have just about 4 points. First point is, in other nations that's occurred. And so I assume most of you know general history of energy. I thought it would be better I just say it than to try to give you a bunch of slides. About in the last 50 years, maybe 70 years, we've been pretty stable in our use of energy. About 80 to 85% of all our energy use is fossil fuels. It hasn't changed, it's gone up. The industry's goal is pretty clear. What they really want to do is something that is very predictable that can get them a profit. And I don't think we're going to change how we do things in the United States. So the energy supply and innovations in energy supply will only scale when it's profitable or when government mandates changes. So to put it another way, we only get energy transformation in this type of governmental or political environment if the government enables some sort of change. So 3 examples of...
I don't like to stand behind lecterns, so I'm going to stand up front. And I don't have a PowerPoint. I'm an engineer, and engineers are always criticized for only being able to talk with PowerPoints, and so I promised I wouldn't use them. But I was asked to talk about what campus is doing in terms of climate and greenhouse gas emissions. So I thought I'd share with you some of the things that we're doing in an infrastructure perspective, and then briefly at the end from a curriculum perspective. And I have to give credit to my colleague, Farmars Bakili, who's the director of the Office of Sustainability with me. I'm academic director, and Farmars does the operations side. And he's actually been a real champion for changes in the way we use energy on campus. And as others have talked about, energy and greenhouse gas emissions and climate are intimately related. Over the last 7 years, we've reduced total energy consumption on campus by 12.5%. Even though campus has gotten big, considerably bigger in terms of our footprint in terms of buildings, our actual energy reduction has been 12.5%. That's pretty remarkable given that campus infrastructure has gotten larger. If you look at it on a per area basis, so like per square foot of rooms, it's a 25% reduction. So our buildings are 25% more energy efficient today than they were just 6 or 7 years ago. And I really give a lot of credit to my colleague Farmars McKillie for being a champion for that on campus. That was done in a number of ways. Perhaps what's most important is thinking about how we manage air on our campus. In many of our older buildings, like the one I've been fortunate or unfortunate, depending how you see it, to have an office in and laboratories in throughout my career, our historic way of managing air was single pass. We would bring air into buildings and it would go out through ventilation systems. And those ventilation systems were designed to run full speed. So in the laboratory, it was designed to refresh that air in the laboratory, assuming the maximum number of people who would be in there at any given time. So a lot of times it was very, very wasteful. And of course, in the winter, we all know we're taking air in, we're heating it, and then rejecting nice warm air to our very cold, frosty atmosphere. And by changing that, one of the things that I remember when Farmars came over and did this in our laboratory, we put in motion control sensors that would actually measure the number of people in the lab. And then throttle the ventilation system depending on how many people in the lab, so that save quality air for the inhabitants, so the people using the lab, but also manage our emissions, our energy consumption very thoughtfully. That ventilation part was a huge part of the changes in our energy use on campus. Also, our heating and air conditioning systems have been regularly upgraded, and our lighting systems. We use much more energy efficient lighting on campus today. Actually, this building here that we're in, Union South, does anybody remember the old Union South? I stayed in the Union South Hotel when I interviewed, and I actually took the job here, believe it or not. But this building was built in part from the ground up because a life cycle analysis on energy consumption of this building showed that it was more cost effective to take it completely down to the ground and build a new sustainable building in this place. And this is a much more energy efficient and comfortable building. And if you look at the floor as I'm talking, you'll see some other things I'm going to talk about in a minute. Other things that we've been doing, water use is a huge energy consumer in the United States. From what I understand and what I read, moving water around and managing water in the United States is the 6th largest source of energy consumption. That's pretty remarkable. So anytime we use water more efficiently, waste less water on campus, we're saving energy. So you go in many of our, for example, our restroom facilities use low flow toilets these days, takes a lot less water. When we use less water, we're actually using less energy and creating less emissions that has a positive impact on climate. So water consumption has been a major change on campus that we've been implemented that's actually affecting the energy signature and then the emission signature as well. Our Charter Street plant. Anybody remember all the brouhaha about Charter Street? We've got a wonderful, clean natural gas plant. Now you might say it's natural gas, it's still fossil fuel, but it's a lot better than the coal-fired power plant, old coal-fired power plant that we had before. And actually, if you look at it from a sustainability metrics point of view, that was a good decision to build that gas plant as opposed to some of the biomass fuel plants that were being proposed at the time. And then finally, I just wanted to remark about something we don't think about as much, but these new buildings we build, these sustainable buildings. I asked you to look at the floor as I was talking just to get a perspective on it. This building's 83% recycled materials. So how does recycled materials turn into energy and greenhouse gas emissions and climate? Well, they're very intimately connected because when we use a recycled material, most of the energy and most of the emissions associated with creating that material, particularly construction products, is in the original manufacture. All right? So when I reuse wood, like in this floor, which went from, that was cut, processed, milled, trucked to a job site, and we reuse it in close proximity with just some refinishing, we get a tremendous savings in energy and a tremendous savings in emissions as well. And in fact, that's something we're doing all over campus. The concrete in this building has lots of recycled content in it as well. Go to other parts of this building, we find lots of recycled stone that was used in the building, and the energy savings and emission savings from that are pretty remarkable, not just in this building, but lots of different infrastructure we see on campus and elsewhere. So, and I give a lot of credit to our people and facilities here on campus who thought about these ideas and tried to build in a lot of energy savings and recycled content and all the new things that we're doing on campus. I also promised I'd talk a little bit about curriculum because I think this is important too. The future depends not on what we're doing today, but about the young minds that we train here at the university and send off into the world. And so one of the things that we're trying to do is create sustainability curriculum. We're creating a certificate program for all students on campus that will provide people with a knowledge base to be able to think about sustainability issues in their work and when they make decisions in their life. And I use sustainability, not climate change, because it's a broader sense, but it does include issues about climate change. And what we want to do is create students who are more than advocates, students who are educated to be able to make thoughtful decisions about, in their life, about how they use energy, how they affect the environment, how they use resources, and that includes emissions associated with climate change. And that's really the future, is creating people who can think about decisions they make and make thoughtful decisions that make a difference in the world. So I wrapped it up with a bit on curriculum because that's where we're going in the future. I'll cut it off there. Thank you, John.
Thank you all. So everyone come sit up here. And let me start by asking, does anyone on the panel have...
The business school on this ad hoc committee?
Not on the ad hoc committee, though. I have consulted with several.
Do you think there should be?
Well, we did invite one and he could not do it.
Oh, okay.
And I won't go into any further than
So I
that.
think,
He's willing to meet with our committee.
okay.
And business schools' concerns about how we handle this are being talked about very much on the committee.
Okay. Does it seem to me that,
Can you repeat who's on?
Right. Well, is Greg here? Greg Nemeth? Greg's in the back. He's from About. Galen's from our committee. Craig Benson's from our committee. I'm on the committee. And Bruce Barrett, who's in the medical school. Bruce is the person that last spring introduced a motion to the faculty senate for divestment.
a person in finance ought to be on this committee
I
because
think it's a very good point.
taking, you know, all these comments in the perspective of how is the future economy going to respond to this current challenge, we need
Well, I
those
can
people
assure you
thinking
that is a
about it.
concern for me.
Yeah.
And we have spoken extensively with people in the UW Foundation to deal with the investment side of the university.
John, can I just add
Is there a student component to your committee?
No, but I have reached out to student groups. One of my students in my First Amendment class is very involved in the student environmental movement, involved with 350.org, and she is arranging a meeting between me and her.
So there's a local 350.org here on campus?
Yeah, I think they're outside the door.
Okay, that's
Maybe somewhere in the
what it
room.
is. Okay.
I would assume so. Yes.
Yeah, so I'm glad you kind of mentioned divestment. One of the questions I have, and I'd like the faculty to answer is, you know, who's actually contributing to climate change? You know, and where are the actual components where we actually change it? And on top of that, I think divestment, which is a campaign that students and faculty are working on, is a great effort for that. So it looks like the University of Wisconsin is doing some great contributions to decreasing their fossil fuel contributions. But we also kind of think have to hold all of the institutions that we also associate ourselves with and make sure that they are also not contributing to fossil fuel. Of course, divestment is talking about decreasing taking out our funds from endowments that support fossil fuels. So some of the top 200 companies were contributing to fossil fuels. And so I wonder if you guys can comment on that.
Sure.
Start the discussion. I think your first question, who's contributing to fossil fuel usage? And I think it's everybody in this room. I don't think of
Anything other than that makes for good press, but it doesn't make for change. I think it's very important that we address things that actually can change. So I make it a point, at least I've had made it a point of talking to the public service commissioners about this as much as I can when I have the chance. And I think and a number of us have gone to local newspapers to talk about their positions and encourage them to have editorials with respect to how one can think of, I'll call it energy use policies, for want of a better word, that can affect climate.
Hi, I'm a student, and I'd also like to speak about the divestment issue. I can't respond to all of the points that you just made, but first I'll say I'm sorry, I missed who said that the way to make change, or an important way to make change, is our individual contributions. It may be important for us to, I mean, I definitely support individual choices like recycling and things like that, but I think when we look at the way that change has been made, large political change throughout history, it's rarely, in fact, I don't think it's ever been through individual lifestyle choices. It's been through movements. And in terms of making that kind of change, UW has a really long history of being a leader on the political scene of these sorts of changes, specifically with regards to divestment. I know that very recently there was a divestment campaign to cut the contract with Nike when they had not paid, I'm losing the word, it starts with an S, wages to their workers. Severance pay to their workers. And UW was one of the first schools to cut the contract, I think the first school, and the impact of that was not just UW, but that other universities then followed suit, and they won, and those workers got paid. And so when we think about like the political ramifications of a divestment campaign, it's really not limited to just what would that financial impact be of just UW, but what would it mean nationally? And when you say that other schools have not had the size of endowments that we have had, all the more reason to step forward as leaders in this country on this issue. And in terms of political support, I know 350.org is an organization that's working nationally where students are supporting these kinds of campaigns across the country. And if UW were to step forward and take a stand there, that would have a tremendous, powerful impact on a very important issue.
But I agree that the leadership issue is very important, but it still kind of begs the question, because if divestment is a bad idea, then not divesting would be a leadership, whether that means we divest or we don't.
So, when I think about the effectiveness of divestment, I think about it in terms of changing the political discourse. And I think that that's not a matter for anecdotes. I think that's also a matter for research. What we learn from the people we speak to can tell us something about that, but it's not a blank slate for research. There's a fair amount which has been written about divestment in South Africa, for instance. And that, it turns out, is somewhat equivocal. There's some evidence that it did some good and some evidence that it was polarizing. So I think it's very important to look at that as an evidence base, social scientific evidence base. But it leads to a bigger question for me. If our goal is to change political discourse, to raise the profile of this issue, and to draw attention to the urgency of effective action, whatever that is, if divestment is not what we might do, what might we do instead that is the most effective thing that we can do to change political discourse? Because that's the battle we want to win.
Quickly.
You know? Well, your area. I mean, you've heard some of the responses already.
Great idea.
I'm an alumni of this great institution and live out in Iowa County. And when we heard about this meeting, there were 8 of us actually that took the drive to come here because climate change is one of our highest priorities and concerns. I think there's a lot of pros and cons about the effectiveness of divestment. I think the university had shown leadership back in the apartheid situation back in the 80s, and to me, climate change is the defining issue of our generation. As all of the speakers very well illuminated, how it affects so many different areas of our any topic, any concern in the world today. It seems to me that the UW, if we were able to take that leadership back on a relatively small issue in comparison, in my view, of apartheid, that we need to do all the things of taking individual concern, working individually in our local governments and state governments, and working on changing governmental policy nationally and internationally. But the UW, in my view, needs to take leadership of changing the conversation, as our last speaker had said, and taking a leadership position and saying, this is what we have to do. We have to do something. We can't continue taking small steps. We need to change the conversation and move this forward. Thank you for your service on the committee.
Question I would ask the room, is the fossil fuel question the same thing as the apartheid question? It's something we have talked about on the committee, and we will talk about it more.
Yeah, they are.
Hey, how much of the economic growth in the world is due to things like oil? Poor countries have been made better off. Oil has done some good things, according to a lot of reasonable people. And so I think it's difficult to say that in a moral perspective, it's the same as apartheid. There can still be reasons for divestment, but I think that's when we come out. So, but I'm just one person on the committee, and that's just my view.
Here we go.
And another reason I said that was to get more hands up. I'm a professor, I teach First Amendment, so it's, I like this. Problem is, where do I start? So I'm just going to start here.
You mentioned how oil has stimulated the world economy, true. But what's it going to do to the future economy as sea level rises and inundates?
Oh, true, but that's why we're in the policies to
destroys agriculture and people
speak.
go hungry. These are things that will destroy the economy in the long run.
Sure.
I mean, I firmly believe that we need to mitigate climate change. There's no question about that in my mind, and I think we need to do it aggressively. But I just also want to emphasize, I do a lot of work all around the world. There's 2 billion people in this world who cook their food, heat their homes, and have lighting from burning wood in their house. And I can tell you that the quality of life that they have and the health effects in that is enormous. And so for me, doing the work that I do in China and other places, to say that I absolutely want to deny these people access to natural gas, that's a moral issue to me. Again, I'm 100% think we need to come up with strategies to mitigate climate, but there's 2 billion people in the world, a third of the world's population does not have access to clean fuels. And I personally, doesn't mean everybody else, but I personally can't just ignore that.
I'll just say that the kinds of emission scenarios, the strong mitigation scenario, typically those kinds of scenarios require that those 2 billion people maintain no access to electricity through 2100. That's what's assumed in those kinds of scenarios. So, is that okay?
One thing I wanted to say is, I've recently read a report, and I wish I could cite it right now, but it's looking like climate refugees, or people who are displaced by climate change and weather disasters, are growing, and they are the highest growing rate of refugees in the world. And so that's one issue that we really have to worry about, as well as a lot of people who are farming for themselves, and they're facing droughts, like the panel talked about, facing droughts, then major flash floods, and they are not able to feed themselves. So I think that it is almost a very morally reprehensible thing to support climate change, because there's so much evidence that morally reprehensible to support fossil fuels, because a lot of the evidence and what they've done for climate change, how they've impacted climate change, has directly affected billions of people across the world. I understand there is the difficulty of switching energy sources, because people do need energy, and the lifestyles we live, we need energy. But I think that it could be one thing that if the university showed that it stands morally that fossil fuels is not okay, and we started to invest in renewable energy as a way of changing the discourse and as a way of trying to help these people who are in rural situations and need access to energy, help them so that we have better changes in technology, we have better adaptations for them to use in their homes. So maybe we can get towards better wind turbine, maybe we can get towards better hydroelectric. We can get towards these things so that they can actually cut themselves and wean themselves off of these fossil fuels, and that's one way that we can really stimulate the conversation.
Question for the panel is, just speaking as a citizen for the last 2 or 3 decades, my frustration is I have never seen a national energy policy ever discussed or even getting close to being put in place. The 2 examples that were provided were obviously areas of the world that they did at least have some kind of policy in place, an energy policy that allowed them to achieve some results. Do any of you ever think we're ever going to have a national energy policy in this country? In our lifetimes?
Well, it depends on what you, in theory, through the last election we had one, it was called all the above. But what worries me, and I think,
Hi, so my name is Laura, and I'm a graduate student here, and I just want to comment on a couple of things. One is the policy question. Policy happens at the state level. We're here at a public institution, and I think that as students, obviously we have a responsibility to work with our state and our local government, but one of the ways that as students we can also impact policy is through our public institutions, and it's really great to see the turnout of students here tonight, you know, exercising our voice is not just in the state legislature, but also at the university, and I think that that should be a big part of the conversation. We're on the same team, we're all part of the same institution, and we want to see it thrive. The second is, I think that the economic argument about divestment, I mean, those are real concerns. I think a lot of people, a lot of financial analysts have a difficult time anticipating when these indicators are going to turn, and I don't know the specifics on how the endowment fared in the 2008 financial collapse, but I would imagine that a lot of people were taken by surprise for managing the endowment, and so I think there's always a level of uncertainty when we're talking about making huge financial decisions that impact so many people, and I think that that's important to acknowledge and then think about the trade-offs that are involved in really thinking through the consequences of that. And the last is that one of the questions that, one of the points that you raised that I think is really relevant and I'd like to know more about is the concern about how divestment might impact the donor base. And I think that's a really critical component of this conversation, and as a student I would really like to know more about how is your committee thinking about that, how is the foundation thinking about it, and then how as students can we talk with donors about this issue?
Well, it's imponderable, right, because we haven't done it. So we don't know, and it's conceivable that X number of people hold out their investment. Okay, you were next.
Hey, thank you all very much for being here, for giving us the chance to speak, and for putting your time and energy into this process. I was really struck earlier when this gentleman said, if divestment, then if not divestment, then what else? By the silence up at the front of the room. In terms of that question of what do we do that's big if we don't do divestment? And you know, I think that as you talk about sort of the moral parallels with slavery or with apartheid, those are not things that are evils in and of themselves. They're things that are evils because people decided that they were evil. They decided that they were activities that they were no longer going to support. Now, as a university, we're not going to solve all the problems of the world all at once. But with divestment, we have an opportunity to make a very big statement that says, this is an economy which we choose not to participate in. We throw our economic, our political, our research weight behind alternatives, and we have an opportunity to really lead. We can't see into the future. We can't see what that might do as far as wood stoves in the third world. We can't see what exactly that's going to do to our portfolio. Of course there are uncertainties, but I think that this is a clear opportunity. You have a lot of people in this room who would support you for taking that courageous stand. And I think if the faculty committee were to stand up and say that they support divestment, I would certainly be there to support you, and I'll bring 100 friends with me.
What's that? I would add that courage can cut in different directions. Yes, and it will be perceived that way by some of them. So the question then is, I love your point though, if we're silent about, okay, what else, then that becomes a problem in itself, because it makes divestment look like maybe the only way to go. So we do need to do more thinking about it as a university. Okay, trying to be fair here, you're in the way back 10 minutes the whole time. Then I'll move that.
Trying to put things in perspective. And I mean, I'm very concerned about what have been the unintended consequences of burning fossil fuel. None of us feel like we're being dirty people when we climb in our car and drive. But once aware of the fact that something I've been doing has been having unintended consequences, then I feel the need to address those consequences. And the concerns that I have is that this planet has been through 5 mass extinctions in its past, in which, you know, over 90% of the life on the planet has been completely wiped out. And the graphs that they're showing us of business as usual takes it into the realm where we're dealing with the actual sustainability of life on this planet. So to me, that rises to such a high moral level that I question, why aren't we using every possible means of getting this information out in the public and acted upon? Thank you.
Thank you.
Me?
Yes.
Oh. I want to say that we sounded, you know, some of the comments make me think that people think that fossil fuels are so wonderful that, of course, they rose up and became the main power of everything. But we're not paying attention to the fact that we have given this industry billions and billions of dollars in subsidies. So it's not that it just arose because it was such a wonderful idea. So one of the ways, aside from divestment, is for us to consider what Professor, is it Corradini? Corradini said, is you put a tax on carbon, you make sure that it rises every year, you return all of that money back to citizens so that it is revenue neutral. And then we'll see what happens when there's a level playing field, when carbon has to face all of the other technologies which are maturing, and see what happens when we're not when we offset these billions of dollars of subsidies.
Mike, you want to say anything?
No, I agree with you. I just, what I guess I was trying to get across with that as an example, though, is that it's not my example. It's been said in a number of venues by a number of people, is that the only reason that I think that potentially long-term.
And I don't want anyone else on this side for a while, if you don't mind.
Fair enough.
A bunch of people over here.
I'm curious about the connection, the arguments about anti-slavery. I mean, can we equate this morally to the anti-slavery movement or to civil rights? And if we, in fact, look at the business as usual scenario and look at the analyses from the insurance industry, from the World Bank, from the IPCC and others, the implications for human health and the loss of life are, in fact, catastrophic. I mean, we're talking about hundreds of thousands already of people are dying from extreme weather, potentially millions, tens of millions from the displacement, the droughts, the extreme weather, the conflicts that will arise. So we surely, I think, could equate this movement morally to the anti-slavery movement. And I'm reminded there's a brilliant book about this by Adam Hochschild, who said in the late 18th, early 19th century, the entire economy of the Western world depended on slavery. It was simply the way the world was. Nobody could imagine a world without it. People's livelihoods depended upon it. It was the way the world was. As unfortunate as it may have been, it was the way the world worked, until a small number of people in a room said that it was wrong and said that there had to be something different. So then I want to pose this as a question to the panel. If national policy is paralyzed, which it clearly is by the power of the fossil fuel industry, if state policy is effectively paralyzed by that same power, then what do we do? What do we do other than a social movement to prevent the business as usual scenario?
I just want to clarify something again. I think it's really important to recognize that there is a lot of people that are in approaches that we need to couple these together. And coupling together is about pathways. And so to me, if the question is only about I'm going to make a step change in energy without thinking about the consequences of that, we're going to do more harm than good. Clearly, we need to be thoughtful about pathways, thoughtful about technology, thoughtful about things that are happening. I should also say that for good or for bad, a lot of my research and a lot of my connections are globally. And I see big changes happening. And I guess one of the things that I worry about is that I think it sort of answers the question before, and sort of your question about what's happening on the political agenda. I see major changes happening in the world, and there's enormous benefits for having a climate
mitigation approach to energy. And I think that economically, in my opinion, we're gonna suffer as time goes on because we're not doing that. In the sense that I think there are many countries that are very active in thinking about technology. You think about congestion in major cities and what's happening with public transportation. You think about the human health and there's so many issues that we're not dealing with that other people are getting ahead of. And I think in the long run that's going to hurt us. So I think there's the drivers locally that people talk about, but I also think if we start observing what's happening internationally, I think those are also going to be drivers.
Okay, start here and just work our way back.
One issue that I think we've kind of avoided is the problem of the expanding world population. And nobody talks about that in terms of climate change, but it certainly has had an impact.
Just to add to that, it's even faster growing than the world population is the access to some of these things that are high emitting CO2. If you look at how much CO2 is per capita in this country, compared to other countries, look at the rate of change. So there's not only population growth, but there's lifestyle changes that are happening around the world. That's even a scarier part of this country.
What we call economic business science. And there are a lot of reasons for that. I mean, one is that if you look around the world, there's countries that have declining populations that have the worst economic prospects in the future because of the cost of retirement. And so, economics is often at loggerheads with other kinds of policies that we like. And yet economics is about our livelihoods. So it's all kind of trade-off sometimes. Yes.
I guess I would go back to having seen and listened to Bill McKibben a few times. He characterizes the fossil fuel industry as a rogue industry. And I think it can be, given its war on what I would say is pretty much settled science. I mean, I don't think you're unique as a panel here with the things that you've brought to us today about evidence. I think you could probably go to any institution of higher learning in the United States and you would get pretty much the same data and maybe some slightly different interpretations. But still, what we're talking about here is the reserves, and we have to remember the reserves of the fossil fuels that are left are the dirtiest, hardest to extract reserves that we know of. And we don't have enough money to probably get all of them out. And getting them all out is probably going to spell that rise in temperature somewhere in the latter part of this century. So when you have a player like that, what are we debating here? Whether it's good to not hand them money that is intended to raise the humanity that we have to each other. I mean, I think these are not good players. And I'm going to tell you, I moved here 3 years ago from Kansas, and I watched right next to the little farm I had, the Keystone XL pipeline go through, or the Keystone Cushing extension. It will be the XL. And I can tell you how a community is approached and how they're treated, and then how they're left by big fossil fuel industry. And it ain't pretty. So I think you have to kind of understand the nature of the beast here. These are the same folks that will deny because there is so much money to be made in this endeavor. And there is so much riding on if their fortunes would turn with a change in the way we conduct ourselves on the planet, how we would get our energy. So we're combating a strong opposition that has a lot to protect here. And they're going to fight us tooth and nail. So I think you have to kind of know the nature of the enemy.
I think that, I have lots of petroleum engineers and petroleum geologists in my family in Texas.
We're going to move our way back. Is there, right there, yeah. Have you spoken before? Oh, I wasn't pointing to you, but now that you volunteered, okay.
I'm just a little bit frustrated with how we've been talking about divestment as if it's like the only thing we're gonna do. I think divestment is the first thing we need to do, and I think really I see it and other people have been working on it, see it as the first step to systematic change. It would be very hypocritical for us to divest and then not switch over to clean energy. We need to do that immediately while we divest. Also, note on developing countries, there was this paper out of UC Berkeley a couple years ago, and the main researcher was Mark DeLucci. And he and his researching team found that basically we have the capacity to power the entire world on entirely renewable energy right now, assuming that every other country wants to have the same standard of life that Americans have. So that is possible. We can use this as we can use renewable energy as a way to transition all these other developing countries into a clean economy. And in the meantime, while that happens, that doesn't mean that we can still get started on divestment here and clean energy here in the U.S. without having an immediately negative impact on developing countries. They can still keep using their wood stoves in the meantime while we get started on a cleaner energy policy.
Can I just, I didn't pick a country in Europe, but now I'll pick on it. So Germany has decided to close all the nuclear power plants. What did they do to, when they shut?
Thank you very much. I just wanted to, my name is Susan, I wanted to speak. I'm a scientist here, I'm an atmospheric physicist, and I also work here at the university as an educator. And I wanted to just speak about the urgency of the issue. I'm very, very concerned about the urgency as a few minutes late, but as may have been said, that the latest Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change report has stated that in order to maintain, with a reasonable probability to maintain an overall temperature change of 2 degrees Celsius, global temperature change, below 2 degrees Celsius, we can only burn approximately the same amount of, we can only burn cumulative CO2 emissions from anthropogenic sources. They have to stay between 0 and 1,000 gigatons of carbon. We've already surpassed half of that, and if we were on the same, we were to continue at the same level that we're at today, the same annual emissions, that we would surpass this cap and on the order of 50 years or so, which is a very short time frame. So what I guess from my perspective is that I'm very concerned that that we urgently need change at a pace that's unprecedented. When I look at our government, I feel very pessimistic because I feel that the kinds of changes that our government has not shown capacity to presently to handle big issues, especially at unprecedented levels of urgency. So I would just urge us to consider multiple pathways, meaning I'm really appreciative of hearing more of the details about the steps that UW has taken to invest in sustainable building practices, to reduce energy use in other ways as well. The 80 bus is fantastic. I mean, it saves a lot of transportation by car. But I also think that we need a carbon tax. I really like the idea of UW fossil free, and I think that divestment would have a role in sending a strong signal, if it happens around many campuses, a strong signal to our national government that we really need really significant action. And I wish the chemistry and physics was not the way it is, but the chemistry and physics is indicating that we have extremely serious and unprecedented scientific problem to address. That's what I would say. And I guess on a very much more minor note, I would say maybe there are some investors who would invest more if they knew that the university was taking these steps to address climate change. And I know for me personally, I'm a very tiny investor, extremely tiny. I know as a staff member, a very small investor, but for me personally, I actually had to reduce my investments in the UW Foundation, or it's always a conflict for me as to what my level could be, and I know that I would want to invest more, again, as a tiny investor.
Yeah, I would like to thank, I had no idea when I put the divestment resolution to the Faculty Senate last spring that you were all going to have to spend so much time over the last 6 months. And Don has put an incredible amount of time into looking at these issues. I still think that divestment is a good thing because it will send a signal from the smartest, best people, who I think my colleagues here at UW really are the smartest, best people in this state anyway, how important it is. We're in big trouble. We're in really big trouble. About 3/4 of the fossil fuels that we know about have to stay in the ground if we're going to have a sustainable future. If the polar caps go, which it might take 200-300 years, but if they go, that's 170 feet, 210 feet of sea level rise. We've been around for 10,000 years. In the next 500 years, a good portion of our species is likely to be dead. We're going to be down a few billion people, probably. I don't know that divestment is going to change anything economically or politically, but it at least will spread the word that this is truly a crisis and that the smartest people who study this care. We should figure out the other pathways forward, absolutely. And they have to be as fast as possible and as big as possible, and especially looking at the people who are at the highest risk in developing countries and our own poor in this country. But I do think that we really need to elevate the conversation as rapidly and directly as possible.
Thanks, Bruce.
You're here.
Mike, let me ask you a quick question. You're involved in the carbon tax movement in Wisconsin, right?
I'm working with, actually, Matt, where's Matt?